Good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to present this webinar this evening with a range of amazing ladies. We are going to be talking about science and STEM and how all of those things can be involved and can actually support different young ladies and women. Today is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and it's the 6th one. And if we think about it, 6 is not so long ago. So why do we do this? Well, there's still such huge differences in the number of men compared to the number of women who are involved in these explorations, in just even tapping their toes into the sciences. And so how do we encourage young girls and women to actually explore these fields, to take away the preconceptions that it's not a space for women to play in, or only men should be looking in this space? So we are really excited to be sharing ideas around this evening and having a look at how we can do that. We've had to have a change in lineup due to an unexpected sadness that happened in one of our contestants or panelists' lives. So at the moment, we've got 2 other panelists here, and then we will be adding to the other lady as she arrives at her destination later in the evening. I'm going to welcome Lusanda. So Lusanda is from Dream Factory, and Dream Factory is an amazing NGO that is doing amazing things. And the other panelist that's here at the moment is Catherine. And Catherine is a data and crime analyst. So we are really excited to have you both. Lusanda, perhaps you want to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background. My dear, you're muted. Lusanda, I'm going to come back to you. Catherine, do you want to... Okay, Lusanda, we'll come back to you in a minute. Catherine, do you want to tell us a bit about your background and how you've got to where you are today?
Yes, sure. Thanks, Karen. So as you've obviously already mentioned, I'm a crime and data analyst. And specific to data analytics, it's an interesting one because you originally wouldn't put data analytics under the field of science, thinking about it in that broad sense. But actual fact is there's quite a few touch points on data analytics, and data analytics forms under the umbrella of data science. And just speaking over data analytics as well in its broad sense, it deals with things like statistics, large sets of data, specifically like mining data, and then also aspects of collecting and processing, and then ultimately analyzing data. And those decisions are usually made with the idea of supporting decision making. So the idea of data analytics is an interesting one because it is so expansive and specific to what I do. So being a crime and data analyst, it's obviously a niche or a specific part of data analytics. And then taking a short step back in terms of how I got here, I studied criminology and psychology. So the criminology space is where I ended up going into. And then one step before that, in terms of what was done at school, the subjects that I did were very different to what you would consider a science. So the subjects that I ended up doing were things like history and geography, and actually very different to the science. So I didn't do science as a subject. And then the other one as well is that I didn't do maths as a subject either. And I think now it's called core maths. And so I actually ended up doing maths literacy. So it's very different to what you do consider science being today. So that's a short little nutshell of what it is that I studied in both school and at university, and a little bit of background about what data analytics is.
So, Catherine, the studies are showing us that only 13% of people who study in South Africa, who study science in South Africa, are women. How would you think we could improve that number? What are the kinds of things that you think are beneficial there?
So specific to girls, it's one where I think it's broadening the idea as to what science is. And as what I mentioned, data analytics is not typically considered a science. So if you can expand the understanding as to what's considered a science, that I think that's always a good starting point, and to explain to young girls and to young women that these are the opportunities there are within science, even though it might not be what's typically considered a science. So I think that's always a starting point, is just to expand and get teachers to understand what opportunities there are linked to subjects which they may teach, and how what they typically would teach is actually could be related to science at the end of the day as well.
See, Lusanda's ready. I'm going to pop her back into our discussion. So, hi, Lusanda. Are you able to chat? So if we look at what's happening in the world around us in terms of women and girls, if I look at my own background, so I taught design and technology for most of my life, and it was looking at how do we encourage girls and women to actually explore these areas, even just getting teachers to go into that kind of space. Often teachers think, no, they can't actually hop into the science space if they're a history teacher or if they're a language teacher. So how do we actually change that mindset? And how do we actually encourage people to explore the kind of thinking that is used within a science space? And I think it's just taking away the fear and saying to people, it's okay. It's okay to get involved and it's okay to explore. So from that point of view, what do you think would be an interesting kind of space to encourage your children to get involved and to participate? So, hi, Lusanda, are you back with us? She's having real trouble. So, Lusanda is in Botswana at the moment, and she's having a real trouble with her connections. So, Catherine, if you have to think of things that you did at school, did you ever think that you would have got into what you're doing today with what you did at school?
No, not at all. And I think that's one of the key things, is that I didn't even know it's at the time when I was at school that what I'm doing today was actually a career or a job that could be done. And it's something that's quite incredible. And I think specific to data analytics, it's key with a whole lot of businesses and corporates, and as I mentioned, it's very key to decision making. So at the time that I was at school, there's not a chance that I knew that this was an opportunity. Yeah.
So, hi, Lusanda. Do you want to give it a bash and let's see? Do you want to tell us about yourself and your background? The technology's not been kind to you, I see. It's really giving you a headache tonight.
Can you hear me properly, Karen? Oh, wonderful.
Yes, we can hear you nicely now.
Thumbs up. Okay. Was your question about my experience of science in school?
Yes, and then how you got to where you are today. So give us a bit of your background as well.
All right. Firstly, I want to say thank you so much, Karen. You know, I just love you dearly. And if you ask anything, I am always there. And I must apologize. I'm currently in Botswana, so just have to, as a woman involved or with difference in the area of science and have to persevere. Right now I'm standing in the middle of my mom's garden, just trying to find the best network behind the wall. So I just learned that in these environments, honestly, you just have to push forward and you just have to give it your best shot, irrespective. I've written exams in, so it is what it is. And I think how I got here was just, to be honest, in school, I never was excited about science. It probably was one of my lowest marks. Maybe it's also because of how science was introduced to us, like by being at the laboratory, and I wasn't very much excited about. My science teacher was super scary, always wore a lab coat. So he didn't, really excite me about the understanding of how to apply knowledge, using methodology. I think maybe if he just honed in that definition, I would have been more excited about science. My why I got is my absolute passion to see young people, young girls, taking up spaces that necessarily aren't theirs or aren't traditionally theirs, and seeing if, why are girls or women not in those spaces. So initially, like, we started just entering the world, the realm of dreams as a young woman, as children in particular setups. What does that mean? And then that has led to just saying, hey, what about women in technology? What about women who are coding? What about women in entrepreneurship? Why do the norms and traditions we've agreed to, do they have to stay the way they are? And so for me, I'm where I am because of trying to set a standard of what is a ceiling. Whatever's that ceiling can be beyond the norm, irrespective of your background and the circumstances that a young woman or a girl can face.
And so tell us about what you studied compared to how you moved into the sciences.
I studied business science.
Oh, sorry, Lysanda, the signal's really bad. So Lysanda runs this amazing NGO called Dream Factory, and they have satellites all over. And the way they engage with young people in terms of upskilling them in relation to data, in relation to learning coding type skills, and also learning about how to actually use digital skills within the space. And what her organization is doing in terms of empowering young people is just incredible. How they are empowering people to learn about digital skills and teaching them from a range of different resources and aspects. So, Lysanda, I'm bringing you back in again. I see you back. Perhaps you want to try speaking with your camera off and let's see if we hear you better. Do you want to give that a bash?
I definitely hear you better. I
Okay,
think I
that
try to
sounds
find
good.
another area.
We can hear you well. We can hear you
Yay!
well.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Wow. And Karen, what was your question was about around what I studied?
Yes, and how you got into where you did today.
So I did business science law, and I'm really grateful about doing. And I specialized in law. I actually even qualified as a lawyer, but I knew actually from in the journey of qualifying as an attorney, I did my articles, and I remember being at a law firm, picturing myself and projecting my future. And I must say that I couldn't see myself practicing law, but I had an appreciation of the kind of framing of knowledge and access to knowledge and the way of thinking that law provided me. And it's that ability that gave me the boldness to be able to tackle areas and projects that are STEM related. Because like I said, in high school, technology were not my favorite subjects. But a law degree, I had the confidence to know that education is the key to education is the ability to find a problem, to know a problem and to know how to solve it. And so having that in mind, number one, I knew that I would be self-employed. And through that self-employment, my passion to upskill, to empower people in lower economic opportunities than I've received drove me to then have access to opportunities where, for example, taking advantage of, let's say, like how I get to know you, Karen, the opportunities of teaching girls coding or accessing technology. For me, using those opportunities is bringing them to spaces like your rural communities, the girl child who's from the township communities. That's what bringing the science and technology is about for me.
So just for people who might have just popped in, to let you know, Lusanda is in Botswana with her signal not being good, so that's why we can't see her. But we're chatting about women in science and girls in science because today is the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And I think it's a really important discussion to have. So how do we actually engage? Catherine and Lusanda, I'd like to ask you both. Perhaps, Catherine, you can begin. But when we look at some of the difficulties that we have with science and giving children access, it's that girls often feel that it's not for them. Both you and Lusanda sort of touched on that within your own experiences. And also that girls think, no, it's more of a boys kind of thing to do, that in society it's perceived as not something women should be getting involved in. How do you think we could change that perception? How do you think we could change that idea? Catherine, perhaps you want to start, and then Lusanda, I'll pop you in after that. So Catherine, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think one of them is that knowledge definitely always has power associated with it in terms of learning. And if you maybe approach it in a different aspect to the opportunities that are there, but also maybe start with the basics. What, first of all, does a school have in terms of the opportunities to teach science-related subjects or even aspects within subjects which touch on science? And then, I think slowly address things in that sense. And then if there are conversations which pop up which are around saying something like, no, this is more of a subject or more of a career that a boy should be doing. Maybe also just addressing that straight on and showing that there's no limitations to what individuals can be doing, and then specific to girls as well. And then using examples of women and girls who have succeeded and gone into spaces of science.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, those are really valuable insights that you've shared. Lusanda, what is your feeling? How do we help girls to change this perception? So you are muted. I don't know if you know that. And I know there's a delay. It's unmuted and muted again.
Hey, Karen.
Hi.
I just picked up the part about what is my opinion on the perception. Is it the perception of girls being involved in science as opposed to boys?
Yes.
Actually, I want to give a really beautiful example. My experience today, I was hosting a webinar with a young lady called Khomozo. here in Botswana, who's one of the first female military pilots.
That's amazing.
And,
that is
you know,
so
she's running
incredible.
a STEAM program to fly Southern Africa. And she's and so before I with her, she had about 20 young girls from the rural community, and basically, you know, handing them certificates. They first went to the airport to fly, and of course, most of them have never been on a plane before. And for me, when it comes to these are the small things, seemingly small things that are big, that break perception in a massive way. You know, in the sense that, like, for example, when we take young kids who are in the township communities to a UCT, it's like if you ask them before, would you come to UCT, without showing them UCT, they'll say no, we'd never apply. But now the experience of going to a UCT, walking the steps, you know, going through the lecture theaters, afterwards we'll ask them, would you apply? Then their hands go up. So it's the same in terms of what Khomozo is doing today. You know, it's like, just take them before you give them these, you know, what can I say, like these complicated formulas, things that they don't understand. Give them an experience. Give girls something that they can be excited about, the opportunity of flying for the very first time. And then afterwards say, would you actually, how many of you would want to be pilots? You know, and of course, the hands will go up. So for me, like today, what I witnessed today was such a living example, and there were only girls there, was such a living example of how you can really start from the grassroots in a very simple way, but in a completely transformative way that can really start to get girls to not see science and technology as this monster.
I agree. It's taking away the things that perhaps we don't even think about in terms of what are difficulties and boundaries. So if you think about it, we're using science every day. Every day we're using aspects of science in our lives. And with using our technology, we're using it even more than we realize. So relating it to what they can relate to always makes such a big difference. In terms of how we can engage our girls and how we can actually say to them, look at the science you're doing. Start off with even in the kitchen and look at the science that's involved with just preparation of food, or look at what science goes into agriculture these days, because they talk about in terms of women that the vast majority of women around the world are actually involved in agriculture. And so if we start with science there and say, how can we improve that? How can we improve your farming skills if you went into the sciences? And then go into all sorts of other areas, saying you're actually doing it already. It's how do you then make it better and how do you improve it from there? So my next question to you, and Lusanda, I hope you can hear me, but the next question that I want to talk about in terms of what you're saying is, how do we actually change perceptions in terms of if a child is coming from a household where it's not seen as the right thing to do? How do we actually help those kinds of girls who may be interested in the sciences, but they've been told at home, don't even look at it. It's not a girl kind of thing to do. And looking at some of the UNESCO kind of stats in terms of the number of countries that still dictate that a husband can tell a wife what job she can go into, or that girls fall out of school because of family obligations or falling pregnant. How do we actually help these kinds of women that are in these really difficult situations to expose them to experiences of science and get them into areas which they are interested in but can't actually get into? Do either of you have a comment? So Catherine, do you want to give it a bash? And then Lusanda, should we go to you?
So that's a tricky one.
It's never easy, and it's always complex.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I would almost say from a schooling perspective, one opportunity could take a different approach, and instead of just contacting and speaking to the children, maybe taking approach of getting the parents involved and showing the parents or the caregivers rather how and what opportunities there can be for those students. And maybe that way there's also an idea and a concept which will spark for them to know that, okay, this is something that they can actually explore or let their child explore that they maybe wouldn't have considered. And at the same time, also opening up those discussions with the children at school. I think that's also quite important as a teacher to address that with them and maybe ask those questions. Maybe those questions haven't been asked in the classroom before. That it's maybe an unspoken aspect. So to engage with the children and understand what their thought process is, because also as a teacher, if you understand where the child is coming from or what restrictions they might be seeing as a restriction, then maybe they can also understand for themselves what they should be doing or what they can be doing, rather than just having a one-sided opinion or this understanding that that's not what they can do. So I think that the core of it is just engaging and understanding that there are various avenues that engagement can take place. So with the caregivers and with the students.
That's a really good point of view, to include as many people as possible who are involved with the children's lives, to actually say to them, how can we help students to get there? Lusanda, what are your views in terms of helping students who perhaps are in difficult situations where they are told they can't actually study the sciences? How do we help those young women? So we're just waiting for the delay for her to unmute herself and then to hop in. So Lusanda, if you're talking, you are muted. I think the signal's died. So it's really interesting in terms of how we can actually help the girls in so many different ways. And I think it's part of just saying, let's see what are the practical things that we can do at school. Let's begin in our classrooms, and let's not leave it just to the science teachers and the maths teachers. Let's think about how we can incorporate it in our different subjects, how we can make them aware of different careers and how the world is changing. If we look at the skills in terms of computational thinking, it's saying, how do we actually look at those areas within that space that we can actually include the students from a range of different areas? So, for example, if you're thinking about the principles of computational thinking, those kinds of things could be used even by the language teachers. So if students are doing coding at school, it could become a language activity where the children are actually writing the code, which could then be marked by the teacher as a language type of activity. So it shouldn't just sit in the space of the maths and science teachers. It should be seen as, how do we help students exposed to it in a range of spaces? So Lusanda, hello, you're back. So in terms of looking at students as a whole, what do you think in terms of helping girls who perhaps are in a difficult situation and are told not to go to science because for whatever reason, that either it's coming from a cultural space or a home space? How can we help those young ladies? And do you think organizations and schools could help them? Let's see if we've got her answer. Lusanda, you muted. Can you chat, or we lost you again? I don't know if we're going to get her back. But let's have a closing kind of statements. So Catherine, from your point of view, what do you think is the takeaway that you would give to girls in terms of, if they've never thought of exploring science, why should they? And if they're arty kind of kids, should they even look at it? What is your feel?
I think with kids these days, and with young girls, it's something that there's so much opportunity out there. I think that's, for me, that's the sum of it. And throughout your schooling career, and if you go to university, throughout that phase where you study, there's always opportunity. And no matter what path you might start, it might vary and change along the way. And just because you start something specific doesn't mean that that's what you need to continue with. And I think that's something which is also quite rigid in terms of the idea of careers, rather than looking at it as the various opportunities which may arise, is that careers may also change and fluctuate. Where, after you, for example, might have finished university, what you thought you were going to do might vary and drastically change 10 years after that. So I think that's something to explore and discuss with young girls at school, that there are various opportunities, and just because you're starting with something specific, or starting at a specific area, doesn't mean that that's how it's going to be, or that's the idea that's going to continue through, that it will change and fluctuate and adjust as you continue and grow.
Yeah, I think that just makes sense. And in the world today where you're not going to stay in a job for your whole life, it's be aware of what's around you and that you can flick and change. And so if we think of students or girls who are interested in the arts and dance and those kinds of things, and then we think of digital and technology and how that all ties together today. So we shouldn't put ourselves in a box, but rather explore and see how these different things can fit together and really learn and engage with each other within that space. Lusanda, let's give it a bash. See if you can share your thoughts. Do you want to unmute yourself? Hello, you've unmuted. Do you want to go?
I've learned, right, that when you are dealing with something where you have to change how people think, like you're saying, Karen, let's say, encourage a group of girls to be involved in science, but other families say, no, it's not the career for you. You have to understand who are active players to involve organizations or as an individual, that you become very tactful. Because whatever you build, if you just isolate the child and do it with them alone, it's not gonna last. Or they can be demoralized. And you find that it's like they're almost in double worlds. And especially for children, they get confused, Here they're being uplifted, told you can be anything. Then they go home and then they face the reality. So it's very important for us to be sensitive to those realities and be able to bring parents, bring whoever is their voices of influence in their lives. So for me, for example, here in Botswana, I quickly learned that I can't do anything without letting the community leaders know, your chief, if I want to do something in a community, who am I to just step in and just do? I have to go ask permission, blessing. I think they're right or wrong, but follow due process, because home to, and it's the same with parents. In this COVID area, it's really for us how beneficial it is to do that. Before that, it was difficult, it intentionally taxing household, but now, given our circumstances, we don't can you imagine? We've realized that the more we've gone into homes and engaged families, the better the retention of those learners are. And so for us, for our work to stick, for our work to have impact, we have to be tactful. We have to really think through who are the people that inform the young women and girls that we're trying to work with, and work with them as much as possible. I know, for example, with us as well here in Botswana, what we were using when we were teaching kids to draw up 3D robots, 3D model robots, taking that robot with you at home was incredible game teaching us like, wow, I never thought this is possible. My child is learning now about flying to the moon. Incredible. I'll make them stay. So all I'm saying is be peaceful and don't isolate the child.
I agree with you completely that we definitely should not isolate the child. We've got a comment here which says the challenge is where to start since we teach in disadvantaged areas. And for me, I think you can teach technology with very basic resources because it's the thinking you want to challenge. So you can be getting children to be solving problems and building activities with thatching grass or with skewers. It's how have you posed the problem and what kind of thinking are you getting the students to do? Because you start with the thinking and then it grows. And when you get access to technology, you can use it. But you can be getting the children to be thinking about the processes, whether it's the design process or the scientific process. You can be using that with very basic kind of technology in terms of getting children to design, to get ideas out, or to follow the scientific process in a really interesting and fun way. You could be getting your students designing a vegetable garden and looking at how they actually grow the plants and looking at crop rotation. So think about things like that. Make it practical. And you don't have to start with high-tech things. You can start with low-tech things. So Lusanda, I think you wanted to say something.
I agree with you 100%, Karen. I mean, in essay, for example, I just learned this new term yesterday of anti-fragility, especially in these times. And that's the ability, like Samakane is saying, you have to be flexible in disadvantaged areas. If it means you bringing 10 phones, 10 tablets, downloading the videos before you get there, printing the work pages, do it. Don't always rely on they must come to me, because in most circumstances, they can't come to you, or you don't have the transport to load, a group of people to come to you. And so you have to think about you coming to them. And I love the fact that, Karen, you brought in the garden patch, because that's what I'm building here in Botswana. I'm learning it from the USA, that idea of meshing maths and science through crop rotation, through agriculture, kids coming and learning the idea of where food comes, but only that calculation or how things can move, why animals are eating on. So there's so much you can do in a garden patch, and that's what we innovating here in Botswana. That agricultural education and life through learning, life through experiencing, seeing, get out of the four walls. And we will be amazed at the kind of children that we will raise, even at low income level, just by accessing the basic things that they are used to and bringing in those subjects with what they taste, they feel, they play with, they get dirty with.
I agree completely. It's how do we make learning real? How do we make it relevant? And then how do we make it fun? It doesn't have to be complicated. We can be exposing the children to all sorts of things in a really fun way that they see as beneficial. And if you think of something like a vegetable garden, they get to taste the vegetables and they might even get to take them home. So it has just so many benefits. Just in closing, I would like to you to give one snippet or one idea in terms of why do you think women in science is important. So Lusanda, if you want to go first, because I think your signal is still good.
Was the question why women should go into the sciences?
Yes, so why do you think we should promote it? Yes, as an ending off comment.
Because I think that for the longest time, our definition of science to us was distorted. And I think when I see a young girl come alive, when they understand the true and definition of science, the application of knowledge through scientific means, when you make it so simple and so relatable, it's almost as if you see that child come alive. You see, why not explore the possibilities of what women are able to come up with, to invent, to reinvent, to rethink, if for the longest time it's been preserved to the male gender. So I think for us it's just an amazing opportunity to see our own possibilities, who we are, and maybe perhaps it's just about, maybe another part of this conversation could be, perhaps it's just that our stories were never told. Maybe there were these incredible women in sciences, but because someone else was controlling the narrative, we don't know. And maybe part of our homework is not just to encourage women to be scientists, but to encourage their stories to be told, that people know that there are these women who are doing incredible things in the realm. Like, for the other day, I was watching that movie on the women that were the mathematicians
Yes.
that in the USA that was so incremental to flying to the moon. I mean, it took so long for me, Luciana, to know about that. How many more stories are either lost, forgotten, or not being told? So that would be my closing remarks.
I think that's so very true. And I think there are lots of those stories that we need to find out and discover and say, how did women play a role in spaces where it wasn't seen to be their job, but they actually were doing it under the authority of other people. So I agree with you completely. Catherine, what is your closing remark?
I think in terms of why girls and young women should be motivated to go into the sciences is that for me, it's also down to empowerment and linked to that opportunity. So by restricting young girls' opinion and perception of what science is, will reduce their first of all their opportunity, and also reduce their possible empowerment within that opportunity. So I think by expanding the understanding of what science is and showing all the opportunity that's out there with related careers, it can hugely open up opportunities for young women and girls in this country.
So I just want to say thank you to you both for taking the time to share, Lusanda, with your driving today and your other commitments, and still saying you're happy to present, and Catherine, for you too, taking your time. I really appreciate both of you for sharing your ideas and just being part of the chat. I do think this is a continued discussion. And I think the more we can say to girls, it's also your responsibility to go out there and find the stories. Go and learn for yourselves. Go and talk to your grandmothers and your mothers. And what did other women do in your community that might not be seen as science, but actually when you explore it, it is. And have the chat. Don't be afraid to have the chat. So ladies, thank you so very much. Have a wonderful evening and take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being patient with me. Oh my goodness.
Oh, no. Thank you. It's so kind.
Pulled it through.